Spectacle of Labor, Professional Wrestling as Capitalist Endeavor, and 20th Century Cultural Theater, 1983 to 1996, by Noel Passeri. Professional wrestling, like history, fuses the real and the imagined, the event with the literary, the concrete with the abstract. While professional wrestling is scripted, its matches choreographed in varying degrees, many professional wrestlers live their lives sculpting their bodies, perfecting fighting techniques, mastering ring psychology, and learning how to endure relentless pain. Their life and labor are professional wrestling. It is a source of pride, pain, and purpose. Professional wrestling functions simultaneously as a part of a capitalist economic system and as theatrical reflection of capitalist culture. Within the content of professional wrestling exist the shifting cultural trends, ideals, and aspirations of those living through a particular socioeconomic period. Throughout the 1980s, cultural nostalgia for the simpler time of the 1950s manifested itself in politics and popular culture. The political and economic atmosphere of militant capitalism provided Vince McMahon Jr.'s World Wrestling Federation the opportunity to gain a near monopoly in the professional wrestling industry. Themes of patriotism, aesthetic vibrancy, moral clarity, and American military might become commonplace in the themes of professional wrestling. As the 1990s progressed, increasing social preoccupations with authenticity began to place the professional wrestling industry under greater media and governmental scrutiny. Promoters' desire for greater popular resonance resulted in storylines in which professional wrestlers' real-life personalities, grievances, and desires became manifest in the performances of professional wrestling. Critics of professional wrestling, such as New York Post sports columnist Phil Mushnick, television news reporter John Stossel, and hosts of cultural analysts within academia's ivory tower, have derided professional wrestling as immoral, violent, crude, and banal. If so, how exceptionally deficient is professional wrestling as a cultural entity? In order to answer this question, one need look no further than capitalism, the economic and cultural cornerstone upon which professional wrestling has built itself. Professional wrestling promoters, such as Vince McMahon, and matchbookers, such as Al Snow, define professional wrestling as a business whose lifeblood depends on drawing spectators and, as a result, increasing profit. French theorist Roland Barthes and professional wrestling writer Vince Russo define professional wrestling as a mirror of both the positive and negative aspects of 20th century society. According to Barth, professional wrestling is comprised of a codependent or symbiotic relationship between the audience and professional wrestling promoter. The overwhelming majority of the audience is aware that professional wrestling is scripted and happily consumes the athletic spectacle, which reinforces their values, athletic preferences, and social aspirations embodied in the performers. In exchange, the wrestling promoter receives the income of the audience and can make a profit. In 2001, Eric Bischoff, the former president of World Championship Wrestling WCW, stated in his interview with Dave Meltzer that professional wrestling combined the best of boxing, football, and soap opera. In essence, although professional wrestling may be viewed negatively by its critics, its prime motivation of increasing viewership, and thereby increasing profit, is derived from the capitalist system that serves as the basis of its labor relations and televised product. Furthermore, the journalists who criticize professional wrestling are themselves components of popular media and, thus, are actually part and parcel of what they are criticizing, a spectacle-driven and profit-based culture. Criticizing professional wrestling for its lack of authenticity, substance, and sophistication. These journalists are an integral part of profit-driven media outlets which aim to court the lowest common denominator of the viewing public through the ratings and advertising system of contemporary television and journalism. Consequently, in order to understand the world of professional wrestling, one must comprehend how capitalism, as an economic and cultural entity, has been broadly defined. Political economists and philosophers such as Adam Smith and Karl Marx saw one of the most important characteristics of a capitalist economy to be the value of one's labor. Greater than gold, or any other currency for that matter, labor is the most valuable force in a capitalist economy due to its ability to nourish the lifeblood of capitalism, the production of marketable commodities. Despite the critical value of labor in a capitalist economy, Marx saw the labor as hidden from the public eye and alienated from what he or she produces. This process results in commodity fetishism, in which the commodity produced by the laborers becomes detached from its creators and gains a seemingly mystical significance in the public eye. For example, a car is seen not as the fruit of the skill of automotive workers on an assembly line, but rather as a symbol of modernity, status, or, depending on the advertiser, patriotism and sexuality. The process of fetishizing commodities falls into the framework of what Italian communist theorist Antonio Gramsci terms cultural hegemony. This means that the deep class antagonisms that are hidden at the base of society manifest themselves dialectically in culture, that is, through the integration of opposing forces. The ruling class must craft a cultural narrative that is palatable to the masses yet charged with the agendas of the elite. Through this process, consent can be largely manufactured through the framing of issues, vocabulary, and cultural spectacle. In terms of commodity fetishism, an advertiser must simply gauge what resonates with his or her desired market, patriotism, power, family, sex, security, etc., and project these values onto a commodity from which the advertiser will profit. Mid to late 20th century French social theorists, such as Guy Debord and Jean Baudrillard, noticed that the philosophical and cultural discourses of humanity that had once been embodied in poetry, literature, and high art had become embodied in consumer goods and public spectacle. Within a capitalist economy, preoccupied with consumption, consumer products began to outnumber human beings as a social and intellectual focus for Western civilization. For Baudrillard, this meant that authentic human interactions and thoughts had been eroded by caricatures of socio-intellectual discourses embodied in faceless consumer products. For instance, Baudrillard noted how Epcot Center of Disney World had created simulated versions of European countries, thus allowing tourists to experience the cultural tropes of Europe without actually setting foot in a European country. For Baudrillard, this was an example of the inauthentic essence of mid-late 20th century capitalism. One may condescendingly describe professional wrestling as an inauthentic simulation of an athletic event. However, there's nothing inauthentic or fake regarding the diversity of skills required to be a successful professional wrestler, or for that matter, the physical toll taken on the wrestler's body. Moves performed in professional wrestling matches are often improvised with a small number of high spots, heavily dramatized attacks designed to awe the crowd, which are planned in advance. Throughout the course of the match, wrestlers judge crowd reaction in order to tell which attacks and falls will best engage the audience. When wrestlers perform a match, they are responsible for each other's well-being. A hold or attack must look realistic in order to dazzle the crowd. However, if too much force is put behind a blow, serious or career-ending injuries can, and do, occur. In a 2000 interview with Pro Wrestling Observer newsletter creator Dave Meltzer, former World Wrestling Federation and World Championship Wrestling champion Bret the Hitman Hart stated that one of his greatest sources of pride as a wrestler was that in his 22 years of wrestling, you could nary find a wrestler from Japan to England to anywhere that was ever physically hurt, where he couldn't work the next day. In spite of the accuracy of this statement, Hart was ironically the victim of a career-ending concussion that he received at the hands of the much less experienced wrestler Bill Goldberg, who did not properly gauge the force of or look in the direction of a standing sidekick delivered to Hart's head. The blow left a thumb-sized muscle tear in the back of Hart's head. Recalling the experience, Hart said, "I got kicked like a guy who gets kicked by a horse." In a 2004 Shoot interview with former World Championship Wrestling announcer Scott Hudson, veteran wrestler Kevin Nash recounted how a fan told him he should give back to the wrestling business. This comment was referring to Nash's reputation among so-called smart fans as an unskilled wrestler who hogged the spotlight from younger, more versatile talent. Nash responded to the fan by stating that after over a decade of wrestling, his body was in a constant state of pain, making it nearly impossible to turn his head and bend his knees. Having sacrificed his body and peace of mind to the professional wrestling business, Nash questioned what more he needed to give back. What makes professional wrestling particular as a capitalist endeavor is the inability for there to be complete separation of a laborer and the commodity he or she produces. A wrestler's labor is certainly owned by a promoter while under contract. It is the task of a wrestler to perform on command, endure grueling touring schedules, and depending on one's spot on the card lineup, receive as little as $100 a match. However, in professional wrestling, both the producer and the fetishized product, in this case the mass-marketed persona of the wrestler, are synthesized in the public sphere of the ring. Every time a wrestler performs, he is deeply intertwined with what he produces because it literally flows from his body and mind. Aspects of the wrestler's personality are often augmented and transferred into public spectacle. For example, second-generation wrestler Lanny Poffo, who in his spare time enjoyed reading and poetry, donned the persona of the genius, a nefarious, effete intellectual who crafted poems in his interviews in order to mock his opponents. His brother Randy Poffo, better known as the Macho Man Randy Savage, was known to be intensely jealous of the interactions of his then-wife, Elizabeth Hulette, better known for her ring name, Miss Elizabeth, with other wrestlers. Savage's jealousy was transferred into storylines in which Savage feared losing Elizabeth's affection to George the Animal Steele, 1986, and then ultimately to his rival and tag team partner Hulk Hogan, 1989. Proper execution of wrestling moves, conditioning of the body, knowing how to take hits from an opponent, conversing with the crowd via grandiose gestures, bonding with the audience through intensely charismatic interviews, and controlling the pace of a match to tell a dramatic story, which literally embodies the hopes, fears, and dreams of the time one lives in, all comprise the essence of labor for a professional wrestler. The experience of this form of work has been described by professional wrestler Gangrel, real name David Heath, as the ultimate drug. In a 2009 interview with CBS reporter Jeff Glor, 30-year veteran professional wrestler, the Nature Boy Ric Flair, said of performing in the ring, "There is nothing like the rush and knowing you owned your audience." Moments later, Flair became tearful as the subject of the interview shifted to his retirement. In order to understand how professional wrestling became such a reflective national spectacle, it is important to understand the cultural dynamics of the 1980s United States. As early as the 1970s, nostalgia for the 1950s was bubbling up in American popular culture. The 1973 film American Graffiti and the subsequent television sitcom Happy Days presented a colorful, fun-filled portrayal of U.S. teen culture in the 1950s, also a decade of burgeoning American political hegemony of the non-Soviet bloc of the Cold War. This was in stark contrast to the imagery of student protests of 1968 and American war fatigue and eventual defeat suffered in the Vietnam War. Furthering the dismal contemporary atmosphere and increasing the desire for escape to an idyllic past, the failure of Keynesian economics to sustain national economic growth created an opportunity for conservative economists to call for massive economic deregulation and cuts to welfare spending in the late 1970s. This combination of dissatisfaction with the present and longing for a more fulfilling national past worked to the advantage of Ronald Reagan's presidential bid. By 1980, Ronald Reagan ran for president amidst campaign ads claiming he would restore America to its former prosperity and strength. Reagan's campaign coordinator, Lee Atwater, adorned Reagan's stump speeches and campaign ads with flowing American flags and positioned camera shots to capture awe-inspired listeners, absorbing Reagan's rhetoric for a return to American military strength and capitalist economics. This atmosphere of Americana, crafted public spectacle, and capitalist militancy created the atmosphere for professional wrestling promoter Vince McMahon Jr. to elevate his World Wrestling Federation to national prominence. Before the 1980s, professional wrestling was organized into a system of regional territories comprised of the members of the Southern National Wrestling Alliance, the American Wrestling Alliance of the Midwest, and Worldwide Wrestling Federation of the Northeast, later known as the WWF. Within the regional territory system, promoters would exchange and cultivate talent on the condition that each other's regional boundaries would be respected and maintained. Professional wrestlers and promoters conducted business via handshake agreements, as opposed to binding legal contracts. In 1983, World Wrestling Federation head Vince McMahon Sr. sold his company to his formerly estranged, dyslexic son, Vince McMahon, a troubled youth and sexual abuse survivor. McMahon Jr. found stability and purpose by working under his father in the late 1970s and early 1980s. In the 1980s, Reagan years, the unbridled capitalistic pursuit of wealth became viewed as a legitimate and positive endeavor, as exemplified by Wall Street movie character Gordon Gekko's statement, "Greed, for lack of a better word, is good. Greed is right. Greed works." Mirroring this national trend, as the new head of the World Wrestling Federation, Vince McMahon Jr. demonstrated an enthusiasm for a cutthroat form of capitalism, rather than the gentleman's agreement approach of his father's generation. McMahon proceeded to position the World Wrestling Federation against the National Wrestling Alliance and American Wrestling Alliance, using company profits to buy National Wrestling Alliance and American Wrestling Alliance talent, television slots, and wrestling venues. McMahon Jr.'s greatest coup was to lure the Minneapolis-based American Wrestling Alliance's top star, Hulk Hogan, Terry Bollea, back into the World Wrestling Federation fold. Earlier, in 1981, Hogan had left the World Wrestling Federation since Vince McMahon Sr. had given him the ultimatum of being either a WWF wrestler or an actor after Hogan was offered a role in the blockbuster film Rocky III. Having chosen the latter option, after his role in Rocky III, Hogan began wrestling for the American Wrestling Alliance. His Herculean physique, over-the-top interviews, and catchphrase of "Hulkamania is runnin' wild" catapulted him to stardom in the American Wrestling Alliance, where he became the most recognizable and popular face in professional wrestling. After Hogan's return to the World Wrestling Federation in 1983, Vince McMahon Jr. found himself better equipped to lure away other American Wrestling Alliance talent, such as Andre the Giant, Jesse the Body Ventura, Mean Gene Okerlund, and Bobby the Brain Heenan, thus forming much of the World Wrestling Federation talent roster. Having secured the rights to many regional promoters' talent and public outlets, by 1984, McMahon had positioned the World Wrestling Federation to be the national face of professional wrestling. However, National Wrestling Alliance and American Wrestling Alliance promoters attempted to counter McMahon's national strategy. Existing from 1984 to 1985, Pro Wrestling USA was an attempt to place National Wrestling Alliance and American Wrestling Alliance talent under a national media umbrella. Despite having the common enemy of the World Wrestling Federation, regional promoters who participated in Pro Wrestling USA found themselves unable to coexist outside of the old regional framework. Those who headed Pro Wrestling USA's management, such as Dusty Rhodes, Jerry Jarrett, Bill Watts, Jim Crockett, and Vern Gain, were often at odds concerning whose talent would receive prominent roles in the promotion. Furthermore, despite operating under the Pro Wrestling USA umbrella, promoters still maintained their territorial domains and attempted to steal talent away from each other for their own promotional use. Under these circumstances, Pro Wrestling USA found itself unable to sustain its existence as a national promotion and dissolved not long after its inception. When asked what was Vince McMahon Jr.'s greatest creative attribute, former World Wrestling Federation writer Vince Russo stated that McMahon's genius lay in his ability to refine the good ideas of others into great ideas that serve the WWF. Nowhere was this more evident than in production and storytelling technique. Preceding the WWF's rise to national preeminence, other promoters had utilized theme music for wrestlers, pay-per-view television, culturally engaging characters, and a heavily lighted ring to emphasize a sense of spectacle to the audience. However, McMahon's disregard for tradition within the world of professional wrestling allowed him to better integrate each of these areas into the world of 1980s television. In a significant way, McMahon proved to be the Lee Atwater of professional wrestling. This occurred largely through McMahon's more relaxed attitude toward the concept of kayfabe, or secrecy concerning the staged nature of the professional wrestling business. Up until the 1980s, many professional wrestlers were unsure of exactly how staged professional wrestling was until they wrestled their first match. The training involved in becoming a professional wrestler was often violent, arduous, and painful. The culture of kayfabe offered wrestlers and promoters a sense of shared importance through access to the secret workings of the professional wrestling business. With knowledge of how the wrestling business operated came an obligation to preserve its secrets. Instead, for McMahon, the code of kayfabe was secondary to expanding the profitability and cultural resonance of the World Wrestling Federation. In order to better integrate the WWF into the hyper-produced cultural landscape of 1980s America, where 1950s nostalgia, cable television, music videos, and Americana stood in the foreground, McMahon began directing WWF programming to resemble a primetime television program, as opposed to a sporting event. In order to achieve this end, kayfabe would have to recede as cameramen, ring crew, and even spectators at live events became exposed to the staged nature of professional wrestling. Crowds were lit in a manner as to create the illusion of a sold-out arena. Wrestlers' theme music was used to condition a positive or negative crowd reaction, and multiple cameramen were directed to capture wrestling holds and taunts from the most dramatic angles possible. In certain instances, if a wrestler failed to execute a move properly, he could simply attempt the move again, with his failed effort being edited out of televised programming for the benefit of home audiences. The content of World Wrestling Federation programming in the 1980s mirrored the cultural tropes present in 1980s political and popular culture. If it was morning in America again, as proclaimed by a 1984 campaign ad for Ronald Reagan, the morning star of WWF television was Hulk Hogan. Upon arriving in the World Wrestling Federation, Hogan became the embodiment of 1980s Americana. Hogan was often seen on World Wrestling Federation programming, carrying an American flag as he energetically strode to the ring, flanked by screaming fans, to the blaring tune of Rick Derringer's Real American. Hogan preached the 3 demandments of Hulkamania, saying your prayers, taking your vitamins, and believing in yourself. A slight against Hogan by a rival wrestler would often be portrayed on WWF television as a slight against America. For example, after an ill-gotten victory over Hulk Hogan, the antagonistic intellectual, the Genius, stole Hogan's championship belt and proceeded to smash the belt backstage with his cohort, Mr. Perfect. When ring announcer Mean Gene Okerlund questioned the Genius as to what he was doing, the Genius retorted that he was simply exercising his First Amendment right to freedom of speech, and then attacked a revered U.S. founding father and supporter of the Bill of Rights by quickly adding, "Thomas Jefferson, I hope you're rolling over in your grave." Permeating Reagan administration campaign ads, as well as motion pictures such as Rambo and Red Dawn, the desire to overcome the Vietnam Syndrome was also a major theme in World Wrestling Federation story arcs of the 1980s. Hulk Hogan's opponents were often portrayed as nefarious embodiments of third world and communist villainy. Hogan's first WWF title reign came after he had defeated the America-hating Iranian villain, the Iron Sheik, who had recently defeated wholesome American athlete Bob Backlund for the WWF title. Following Hogan's victory over the Iron Sheik, actually named Khosrow Vaziri, Hogan proceeded to feud with Soviet villain Nikolai Volkov, actually Josip Nikolai Peruzovich, a Croatian, who would often enrage crowds with his boastful singing of the Soviet national anthem and waving of the Soviet flag. In a 1985 match on WWF's Saturday Night's Main Event, Hogan defeated the underhanded Volkov character in a flag match. Following his victory, Hogan grabbed Volkov's Soviet flag, spat on it, shined his boots with it, and threw it on the ground. Hogan then proceeded to grab his American flag and stand victoriously over the crumpled Soviet hammer and sickle. Vietnam Syndrome. Storylines persisted after the thaw in the relations between the United States and Soviet Union, however. In 1990 and 1991, the Persian Gulf War provided an opportunity for both the American mass media and military to demonstrate the geopolitical and military prowess of the United States. As the Iron Curtain unraveled, the Soviet Union allied itself with the United States in the Persian Gulf War. While current events unfolded, the Nikolai Volkov character ceased being a villain and aligned himself with patriotic wrestlers Hacksaw, Jim Dugan, and Hulk Hogan in their fight against Iraqi sympathizer Sergeant Slaughter and Colonel Mustafa, the Iron Sheik in Iraqi war fatigues. Volkov's character had shifted from villainous Soviet to well-intentioned ally in need of the aid of the superior Hulk Hogan, and symbolized this new alliance by wearing both an American flag and Soviet flag on his jacket. Hogan ultimately went on to defeat Slaughter in 1991 at WrestleMania 7, reflecting Saddam Hussein's defeat in the First Gulf War. As the early 1990s progressed, concerns with authenticity were becoming ever more prevalent in mass culture, resulting in a rejection of many of the main tenets of the 1980s. Fashionable commodities were defined in contrast to what was considered an overproduced 1980s mass culture and outmoded nostalgia for the over-idealized 1950s. Late-night talk show host Arsenio Hall derided white rapper Vanilla Ice's music as a distortion of authentic rap culture. Postmodern nihilism became the ideology du jour of many academics within the humanities in opposition to the optimism of the Reagan years. Shock jock Howard Stern embraced Nietzschean tropes of self-exaltation, mockery of the weak, and unrepentant hedonism, all contrasting with the long-standing values of the stalwart, cleaning living, archetypal American hero. Nostalgia for the rebellious 1960s, instead of the conformity of the 1950s, permeated the political rhetoric of Bill Clinton's 1992 presidential campaign, as he presented himself as a successor to John F. Kennedy Jr. Even though Clinton had avoided being drafted for the Vietnam War and admitted to experimenting with marijuana on the Arsenio Hall show. If the cultural zeitgeist of the 1990s was being defined in contrast to what was considered the inauthenticity of the 1980s, the WWF made an attractive target for both media personalities seeking to embrace the cultural trends of the new decade and professional wrestlers who felt they had been abused during their tenure with that company. In early 1992, the World Wrestling Federation came under scrutiny for steroid abuse and homosexual sexual harassment scandals. The scandals allowed tabloid television journalists such as Phil Donahue and Nancy Glass to simultaneously portray themselves as morally superior to the professional wrestling industry, while exploiting its backstage dysfunction to titillate their audiences. Despite the hypocritical nature of the 1990s tabloid news programs, they provided wrestlers and announcers such as Barry Orton, Tom Hankins, and Murray Hodgson with a public forum to present their grievances, which in turn led to the resignation of implicated WWF officials Pat Patterson and Terry Garvin. The synthesis of reality and simulation manifested itself not only in the spectacle of the ring, but in the spectacle of the wrestler's body. This became evident when the World Wrestling Federation came under media and federal scrutiny for steroid abuse among its wrestlers and possible steroid distribution among its officials. Seeking to protect his reputation as a role model for children, Hulk Hogan appeared on the Arsenio Hall show in late 1991. When asked about steroid use, Hogan stated that he had only used prescription steroids therapeutically in 1983 in order to recover from an arm injury sustained after a match. Years later, in his 2002 autobiography, Hogan admitted that his statement was a lie and that he had taken steroids regularly throughout the 1980s in order to augment his physique. In the midst of the scrutiny surrounding steroid use in the WWF, Vince McMahon began placing younger, more slender wrestlers in the foreground of the WWF to counter the impression of pervasive steroid use among his wrestlers. After a year hiatus, a drastically slimmed-down Hogan returned to the WWF in 1993. Following his fifth WWF heavyweight title win at WrestleMania 9, tensions rose backstage between Hogan, Hart, and McMahon since McMahon's desire to rebrand or update the WWF around younger talent required that Hogan lose his belt to a next-generation star. Being from a time in which the size of a wrestler demonstrated importance, Hogan preferred to be felled by the over 500-pound Yokozuna rather than the much smaller mid-card, mid-level wrestler Bret Hart. Hart, a second-generation Canadian wrestler who had devoted his life to honing his skills as a professional wrestler, was irate and felt insulted, winning this final skirmish of pride, but losing the overall war to remain WWF's top draw. Hogan would soon lose his belt to Yokozuna at King of the Ring, 1993. This would be the final time Hogan would appear on WWF programming for 9 years. By the late 1980s, the old regional wrestling system lay in shambles. In its dying days, the American Wrestling Alliance had given a former frozen food salesman and young wrestling announcer named Eric Bischoff the responsibility of selling American Wrestling Alliance to local television stations. Bischoff, who had developed a friendship with its owners, the Gagnes, felt a sense of loyalty and respect towards the American Wrestling Alliance. However, the grave financial straits of the AWA proved too much to overcome, and by 1990 the American Wrestling Alliance had closed its doors. The National Wrestling Alliance had found itself in similar peril. Of the remaining promotions within the NWA, only Jim Crockett Promotions World Champion Wrestling was able to secure a stable national television slot via Ted Turner's TBS cable station. Seeing Crockett's promotion in financial danger, Turner offered Crockett a buyout, and in 1988 began revamping the WCW as a major national competitor to the WWF. Following the tenures of the abrasive Jim Herd and Bill Watts as executive vice president, a young Eric Bischoff, whom Herd had hired as an announcer, was appointed as WCW's company head. With the example of Vince McMahon Jr. before him, and the financial support of Ted Turner, Bischoff proceeded to apply the formula that McMahon Jr. had used against his former employer, Vern Gagne of the American Wrestling Alliance, namely, to lure away the competition's talent, find ways to enhance that talent's cultural resonance, and use television as a vehicle for brand dominance. Years before, the gaping wound from which Gagne's American Wrestling Alliance had never recovered had been the WWF's acquisition of Hulk Hogan. Now Hogan's strained relationship with McMahon provided the World Championship Wrestling with an opportunity to sign wrestling's most recognizable face. While the WCW was a smaller stage than the WWF, Bischoff and Turner claimed they could offer WWF talent a more financially stable and creatively autonomous work environment. In 1994, the WCW signed Hogan to a lucrative contract which offered him a guaranteed fixed salary and creative control over his character. Following Hogan, the WCW signed the Macho Man Randy Savage from the WWF. Savage's loyalties to the WWF had waned after being demoted to the role of ring announcer in order to provide a larger platform for WWF's new generation of wrestlers. By 1995, WCW was receiving increasing national attention as Hulk Hogan's tenure with the company attracted celebrities such as George Foreman, Mr. T, Dennis Rodman, and Shaquille O'Neal to participate in company events. While in a meeting with Ted Turner and Turner Broadcasting executives, Bischoff was asked point-blank by Turner what was needed to compete with the WWF. Caught off guard, Bischoff responded, "Well, Ted, I think we need to have prime time." Turner then turned to Scott Sassa, who oversaw Turner's network television, stating, "Scott, I want you to give Eric 2 hours every Monday night on TNT." While Turner's decree came to the chagrin of Sassa, who viewed wrestling as too lowbrow for the TNT network, Bischoff now had a primetime slot equivalent to the WWF's flagship program, Monday Night Raw. While McMahon had found success in the 1980s by having his characters and storylines mirror Reagan-era Americana, Bischoff and his creative team now sought to capitalize on 1990s cultural fixation with disenchantment and the search for authenticity. This process began in 1996 with storylines revolving around WCW wrestler Brian Pillman. On-screen, Pillman played a wholesome hero character. Backstage, however, Pillman was known for his eccentric personality, which was at times lighthearted and at other times dark. Pillman and Bischoff devised a storyline in which Pillman would transform himself from Flyin' Brian into Loose Cannon Brian Pillman, an unpredictable wrestler whose persona and rhetoric blurred the line between fantasy and reality. In order to solidify the impact of the character, Pillman and Bischoff hid both the details of the loose cannon character and direction of the storyline from wrestlers. The storyline culminated in Pillman's competing against the Taskmaster, Kevin Sullivan, at Super Brawl VI. Sullivan, who played a villain wrestler, was also, unbeknownst to fans, the head booker, or person in charge of matchmaking and storyline direction for WCW programming. The stipulation of the match was that the loser would admit his inferiority to his opponent by stating, "I respect you." However, a minute into their match, Pillman grabbed a microphone and exclaimed, "I respect you, Booker man." After publicly linking Sullivan's on and off screen roles, Pillman stormed out of the arena to the dismay and wonder of fans and wrestlers alike. To the annoyance of many in WCW, Pillman, who began embracing the loose cannon persona in his life outside of the ring, left the WCW shortly after Super Brawl and continued his loose cannon character in the WWF. Upon looking back on the storyline, Bischoff stated, "That's the beauty of our business. A lot of magic of wrestling happens from blurring the line between reality and show business. It enhances the suspension of disbelief." The line between reality and storyline continued to blur throughout 1996, as wrestlers began to vent their professional and personal grievances into the fabric of storylines. In the WWF, a segment of McMahon's new generation of wrestlers was becoming professionally and physically exhausted. Wrestlers Big Daddy Cool Diesel, Kevin Nash, Razor Ramon, Scott Hall, the 1002-3 Kid, Sean Waltman, and the Heartbreak Kid, Shawn Michaels, Sean Hickenbottom, referred to by other wrestlers backstage as the Clique, had begun comparing each other's paychecks for matches. Kevin Nash, in particular, felt slighted regarding his pay for his match at the 1995 WWF Survivor Series pay-per-view. Making only a marginal appearance instead of wrestling a full match, Shawn Michaels was paid $15,000 more than Nash, who had wrestled a full match that night. Nash was not the only Clique member who was becoming frustrated with the WWF's working environment. The 250-day touring schedule of the WWF had left Scott Hall physically exhausted. Furthermore, Hall had felt he was not being properly compensated for his merchandise sales. Both Hall and Nash had been mid-card wrestles in WCW before achieving success in the WWF. With WCW offering a lighter 180-day touring schedule and fixed salary guarantees, Hall and Nash signed with Eric Bischoff by 1996. Despite being made the centerpiece of WCW's roster, Hulk Hogan was finding himself professionally frustrated within WCW. Hogan's 1980s persona and Northern WWF roots had made him increasingly unpopular with WCW's 1990s Southern fanbase. By 1996, Eric Bischoff found himself with an increasingly unpopular Hulk Hogan and the imminent arrival of two of the biggest faces of WWF's new generation. The trope of gang villainy was one that was present in WCW's history. Throughout the 1980s, one of WCW's most popular acts was billed as the Four Horsemen. The characters in this act were a gang of villainous anti-heroes headed by the flamboyant Playboy and WCW champion Nature Boy Ric Flair. The Four Horsemen's combination of simulated banditry and luxury enthralled Southern crowds. Eric Bischoff and WCW had working agreements with New Japan Pro Wrestling. Bischoff was intrigued by one of NJPW's storylines, in which wrestlers from the UWF, a rival promotion, arrived at an NJPW event and proceeded to attack the New Japan's talent. With two WWF wrestlers arriving at the same time, WCW's creative team, consisting primarily of Bischoff and Sullivan, saw an opportunity to use the provocative trope of a northern invasion of the southern-based thus alluding to the American Civil War and playing on the remnants of anti-northern feeling. Adding an element of realism to the WCW's prospective invasion storyline was the fact that Hall and Nash had once worked for WCW and were legitimately disgruntled with their lot in the professional wrestling business. On the May 27th episode of WCW Monday Nitro, the invasion storyline began. During a mid-card match between The Mauler and Steve Dahl, Scott Hall emerged from the crowd, not in costumed wrestling gear, but in street clothes, thus demonstrating his authenticity as an outsider. Climbing over the guardrail, Hall entered the ring, demanding, "Give me a mic." Upon receiving the microphone, Hall proceeded, "You people know who I am, but you don't know why I'm here. I go wherever I want, whenever I want. You people want a war, you're going to get one." In subsequent episodes, Nash made his debut as a fellow outsider. Soon, the invaders cryptically claimed that three of the best, presumably from the WWF, were going to battle with the WCW where it counted, in the ring. Despite his waning popularity among the WCW's fans, Hulk Hogan had rebuffed suggestions by Bischoff to embrace a villain persona, stating, "Well, brother, until you've walked a mile in my red and yellow boots, you'll never really understand." However, after observing the unfolding storyline involving Hall and Nash, Hogan expressed interest in being the cryptically referenced third Northern invader. Hall, Nash, Sullivan, and Bischoff were hopeful Hogan would commit to a new role as a villain. However, due to the creative control clause in Hogan's contract, nothing could be cemented until Hogan embraced his dark persona on television. The scheduled showdown between the mysterious Northern outsiders, as Hall and Nash had been dubbed, and WCW's team of heroes, Sting, the Macho Man Randy Savage, and Lex Luger, was to take place at the 1996 WCW pay-per-view Bash at the Beach. It was suggested by Nash that Hogan not appear until the match's climax, and upon arriving, shock the audience by aiding the WWF wrestlers, as opposed to his WCW comrades. It was decided by WCW's creative team that this would be the most dramatic storytelling device. As the match progressed, Hall and Nash were not completely certain Hogan would commit to the plan. If Hogan did not appear at the match's climax, Sting was to betray his fellow WCW combatants and aid the Northerners. However, this was not necessary since, when all hope seemed lost for the WCW team, Hogan dramatically walked down the entrance ramp. Upon entering the ring, Hall and Nash retreated from the ring, allowing Hogan to turn to the fallen Macho Man Randy Savage, whereupon Hogan delivered his atomic leg drop finisher to the imperiled Savage. Kevin Sullivan had purposely booked the Bash at the Beach pay-per-view at Daytona Beach, where he hoped the audience would be drinking heavily and thus would react more emotionally to the shocking climax of the show. After Hogan attacked the felled Savage and embraced the Outsiders, shocked murmurs turned to an orgy of emotion as fans pelted the ring with debris. One fan attempted to rush the ring but was quickly pulled down by security. Amidst the sea of emotion, Hogan motioned for announcer Mean Gene Okerlund to bring a microphone to the ring. Hogan proceeded to perform a worked shoot, an interview in which backstage tension is utilized for the purposes of making a wrestling story more impactful. Hogan declared, "You can call this the New World Order of Wrestling, brother. These two men here came from a great big organization up north. Who knows more about that organization than me? I made that organization a monster. I made the people that ran that company rich up there, and when it all came to pass, the name Hulk Hogan, the man Hulk Hogan, got bigger than the entire organization. As far as I'm concerned, all of this crap in the ring represents these fans out here. For 2 years, I held my head high. I did everything for the kids. I did everything for the charities, and the reception I got when I came out here. You fans can stick it, brother." In a state of simulated disarray after Hogan's interview, the WCW head commentator signed off, then stated, "Hulk Hogan, you can go to hell. Straight to hell." The New World Order NWO story arc went on to become the most successful storyline in the history of WWE's fans' mixture of hatred and eventual sympathy for the renegade band of invading anti-heroes led WCW to become the top wrestling company in the country, defeating WWF in the ratings for 83 weeks straight, from June of 1996 to April of 1998. The NWO storyline was the crystallization of WCW's wrestling promoters' desire for profit and its wrestlers' search for meaning, stability, and dignity. A culture that clamored for authenticity had found a resonance with the claims of alienated laborers who sought to forge a new path based on their interests, in a world where fantasy and reality were becoming rapidly indistinguishable. Recalling the NWO story arc, Bischoff explained, when the NWO attacked WCW, they took the audience's real-life emotions and turned them into wrestling weapons. Professional wrestling had operated according to capitalist economic principles and mirrored its cultural ideals. By the end of the 20th century, it had now embodied the angst and aspirations of the workers who made the cultural spectacle of professional wrestling possible. The decades of the 1980s and 90s were characterized first by greed, nostalgia, and patriotism, and then by uncertainty and the search for authenticity. Within this evolving economic and cultural framework, professional wrestlers devoted themselves to an arduous capitalistic industry that reflected these values. Wrestlers' minds, bodies, hopes, fears, and labors were augmented into cultural spectacle. Wrestling promoters found ways to exploit and creatively parody cultural trends for profit. Meanwhile, in the world of professional wrestling, not unlike the world external to it, laborers struggled for dignity, purpose, and security in a world where artifice and authenticity had synthesized. Bibliography: ABC's 2020 exposes Pro Wrestling Part 1 of 2 online video clip. YouTube, http://www.youtube.com. Watch, EQEB2ZK Suore. Uploaded December 14th, 2010. Barthez Roland. The World of Wrestling. Mythologies. New York, Hill and Wang, 1972. Pip 25. Battle Cry. Of Freedom. Ronald Reagan. Peace Through Strength campaign commercial. 1980. Online clip. YouTube. http://youtube.com. Watch. VOIPMHJOLCM. Uploaded December 21st, 2008. Camel Clutch blog. Stone Cold Steve Austin interview on Pro Wrestling Radio. Online clip. YouTube. TPS.youtube.com. Watch. VOUSER MCB08. Uploaded July 14th, 2012. Cap 420. Rare. Vince McMahon on The Howard Stern Show. 2001 full audio. Online video clip. YouTube, https://youtube.com. Watch T4. Uploaded May 9th, 2013. Club Attitude 2000. Eric Bischoff. Shoot interview Jan 12th, 2001. WOL online clip. YouTube, http://youtube.com. Watch AJQX7CCK8. Uploaded December 7th, 2013. Club Attitude 2000. Barrett. The Hitman Hart. Shoot interview, March 2000, WOL. Online clip. YouTube, https://youtube.com. Watch V3SLTF1SPUA0. Uploaded October 17, 2013. Xardes DX WWE Hulk Hogan entrance video. Real American online video clip. YouTube. YouTube.com. Watch. BCUFNYK. Uploaded July 15th, 2008. Feluga. Dino modules on Marx. On fetishism. Introductory Guide to Critical Theory. http://purdue.edu. Guide to Theory. Marxism. Modules. Marx fetishism. HTML. Flair. Rick with Keith Elliott Greenberg. ED. Mark Madden. Ric Flair. To Be the Man. WWE Books. 2004. 139.43. Firestorm. Purified Donahue on drug and sex scandal in 1992. Online video clip. YouTube. https://youtube.com. Watch. TRNBEUJM. Uploaded November 20th, 2011. Guest booker. Al Snow, The Attitude Era. DVD. Sean Oliver. 2011. Guest booker. J.J. Dillon. DVD. Sean Oliver. Gramsci. Antonio. The Parties and the Masses. L'Ordine Nuovo. 20 September 1921. Translated. For Marxists.org by Mark Camilleri. http://marxists.org. Archive. Gramsci. 1921-09. Parties Masses. H.T. Hart. Brett Hitman. Random House, Canada. 2007. Hash owns. Hulk Hogan joins NWO Bash at the Beach. Online clip. YouTube. This is youtube.com. Watch. V09ZXRZNM. Uploaded March 27th, 2010. Hogan, Hulk with Michael Jan Friedman. Hollywood Hulk, Hogan, WWE Books, 2002, pp. 209-211. Hornbaker. Tim. National Wrestling Alliance. The Untold Story of the Monopoly That Strangled Pro Wrestling. ECW Press, 2007. Keller Wade. Streak is Over. Raw beats Nitro in TV ratings with teased Austin vs. McMahon match. http://podorch.com. Our Artman 2. Publish. Torch Flashbacks 2019. Article. K9 AM Wiki PGM LWBVH Kyleris on 1 CW Nitro 6. Scott Hall debut. Online clip. Dailymotion. http dailymotion.com. Video. XQNPG WCW Nitro. Scott Hall debut. Sport flash from Embed I Frame. Magnus Lee. Vanilla Ice Arsenio. Hall interview full. Online video clip. YouTube. https://youtube.com. Watch. VKA's SF339E. Uploaded October 15th, 2009. Monsoon. Cloud Classic. Nikolai Volkov. Slaughter main event. November 23rd. Team. Online video clip. YouTube. Episode.youtube.com. Watch. V. Johu JQXCI. Uploaded October 4th, 2013. Morgado Andre. Ronald Reagan. TV ad. It's Morning in America again. Online clip. YouTube. https://youtube.com/watch. VEUIBF-DNSY. Uploaded November 12th, 2006. Perez, Adam, Kevin Nash, Scott Hall, and X-Pac NO New World Order. Q&A panel. Part 1. Alamo City Comic Con online clip. YouTube. www.youtube.com. Watch. VNIP7LM. Uploaded October 28th, 2013. Ric Flair on Life of Wrestling. Online CBS News. 2.cbsnews.com. Videos. Ric Flair on Life of Wrestling Rogers. Daniel T. Age of Fracture. First Harvard University Press, 2011. pp. 47. Rosenberg Peter. Wrestling with Rosenberg. Hulk Hogan. Online clip. YouTube. http://youtube.com. Watch. G9 Vero Wives. Uploaded October 18th, 2011. Salmon Nicholas. Steel Chair to the Head. The Pleasure and Pain of Professional Wrestling. Duke University Press. 2005. Smith. Adam. On the Real and Nominal Price of Commodities, or Their Price in Labor and Their Price in Money. Book 1. On the Causes of Improvement in the Productive Powers. On labor, and on the order according to which its produce is naturally distributed among the different ranks of the people. http://www.marxists.org. Reference Archive. Smith Adam. Works. Wealth of Nations. Books on. Joe, I am stand up for infamous Hulk Hogan appearance on Arsenio Hall show in 1991. Online clip. YouTube. http://youtube.com. Watch V6C SBU8 and Goo.com. Uploaded February 6, 2011. Timeline history of the WWE 1986. George Steele. DVD. Sean Oliver. The Partially Examined Life. Rick Roderick on Baudrillard. Fatal Strategies. Full length. Online video clip. YouTube. https://youtube.com. Watch. V2U9MFTV40C. Uploaded January 25, 2012. The Razor's Edge. Sting confronts Scott Hall on Nitro. Online clip. YouTube. https://youtube.com. Watch. VMR8. UXHD68. Uploaded August 3rd, 2009. Title Match Wrestling. Gangrel shoot with Luna Vachon. Online clip. YouTube. https://youtube.com. Watch. VJ Z4ETZY. Uploaded August 4, 2012. Ultimate Insiders with Ed Ferrara and Vince Russo Part 1. Inside the WWF. DVD. Wade Keller. 2005. Wilton. Steve. Lanny Poffo. The Genius Through the Years online video clip. YouTube. https://www.youtube.com. Watch. N92K WAE. School Talk. Vince McMahon, very rare documentary 1999, WWF Attitude Era. Online video clip. YouTube. https://youtube.com. Watch. VEROEH7PCRA. Uploaded September 21st, 2013.